Yeah, thanks guys. Bear with me because this is kind of 2 or 3 presentations all jammed together in different pieces. Like as I think about entrepreneurship and like how many hats you have to wear, there's a bunch of different ways to approach it too. Allison gave me a pretty good run through, but I started at Michael Graves Design Group in Princeton, New Jersey, doing toasters, blenders, mops, brooms, buckets, everything, but learning how to make things. That was kind of my intro into it. I moved back to Pittsburgh about 12 years ago at this point and started a very small startup called Four Moms, the baby products company that everybody probably knows. At that time it was 8 people, and they had kind of an idea to bring low-cost electronics into juvenile products. And you've seen kind of how that business has grown. So throughout that process, as that kind of grew, I founded my own studio in 3 years ago, Base Design, and we work with companies like Carta. They're doing 3D imaging and mapping, electronics, a lot of self-driving, autonomous vehicles, a lot of technology companies we work with here, mainly focused in Pittsburgh and really focused around kind of the startup culture. So, this is the general kind of what is design thinking, how to apply it to your company, your business, as you're either testing a business model or you have an idea for a product. What is that? And it's all about this focused, linear way to bring uncertainty and chaos of ideas into something much more linear, process-based, and how can you apply that structure? So, over here you've got the uncertainty and all your ideas and like, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. I don't know, does that cost too much? Let's see. You test it, you prototype it, you start testing that, and as you get there, you start with kind of researching or focusing in your design efforts and honing that down, picking and choosing. Designers like ambiguity. So a lot of the times on the front end of this process, this design thinking process, there's lots of question marks. Designers tend to be okay with question marks. Sales teams, maybe not so okay with it. Business development teams maybe want more clear-cut answers, but we're okay with that big process. We're like the sensitive artists, right? We're really in tune to like the tiny little nuances of people using it, right? So like the blue's just not the right shade, or like asking questions that blow up the whole project. Like why are we doing it this way? Well, because we've got 8 months worth of work in that direction, and that's why we're doing it that way. But we're good at asking the questions. Designers are really happy to jump into a process and start asking questions. Because of that, we're like the canaries in the coal mine, right? So in these early stages, when you're thinking about your business or your product idea or the problem that you're trying to solve, whatever that might be, designers tend to be the canaries asking those questions and saying, if we thought about this, or what about this? You start asking these really hard questions. A lot of the times it's like, do you want the truth? How much does it cost? Is it actually going to work? Designers are okay with all of those being question marks and floating around in space. And this process is meant to take you through all those question marks then to get to a testable, actual product. When I say product,
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
I was just wondering if you're going to have these slides.
Yeah, these will all be available online. Yep.
You want to unnecessarily take copious notes.
Yeah.
So,
yep.
okay.
No problem. So this is pretty much the widely accepted design process. You want to develop a deep understanding of the challenge, so you define what that challenge is. Is this designing a chair that's foldable? Is this making a stroller that's more lightweight? Is this making it cheaper, easier to use? What's the problem? What are you trying to solve about this? When you get into ideating, that's the fun part. That's the part where you see the companies like IDEO and Valley and Daedalus like brainstorming. What if this? Post-it notes on the wall. from those Post-it notes, you want to develop a little bit more of a focus and start testing and prototyping those. You prototype it, it starts big, loose, ugly. I'll get into methodologies for that later in the presentation. And as you continue to whittle that process down through testing, you gradually improve your design to the point where it gets over the wall into something that you feel has actual legs or has the ability to be something. So this is going to go through each of those phases. So the what if is asking the big question, right? What if we made a chair that was this big? It doesn't matter what it is. What if we add lasers to this process? Would that improve, right? It's your big baseline, that nagging question right before you start the business. Like, why isn't this easier? Why isn't this faster? It's got to be simpler. That's your question, your hypothesis. From there, you want to get into that as quickly as you possibly can, testing that idea, right? So from your hypothesis, this is the most famous example, like, ever. I'd be surprised if anybody couldn't name that that's an OXO potato peeler. And he started with the hypothesis of, my wife's got arthritis, she's using this crappy metal thing, hurting her hands. There's got to be something better, like, why? Immediately jumps into kind of testing and, like, from just putting a really big thick handle on it. Okay, that's okay. Let's continue to optimize. But the important part is the quickness, the speed with which you test that. Like, how quickly you get down this path. Iterating. I think iterating is the thing that you can either get stuck in a permanent iterating loop where you're constantly tweaking and not knowing how to jump out of that process, or you might be on the other side of that equation where, the first idea is, that's it, it's got to be silver, and if you don't iterate enough, you're not stepping outside of those lanes to kind of test your idea. So you want to be iterating. You want to iterate often. The looser and quicker you're iterating, the better, because you're seeing a wider range. There's time to focus later on, which is after you iterate. You want to be kind of drilling in once you've iterated, once you've kind of cast a wide net, you want to start kind of focusing that down. The really applicable thing, I don't want to just talk in generalizations about this. I want to give you some really kind of quick exercises you can do. There's all kinds of stuff. You can do storyboarding, you can do connections, which is this plus that. You can do, I always like that makes me think of, which is kind of like if you've got a team of people together and you say, I was thinking the chair could be purple. And you're like, that makes me think, what if the chair could change colors like all the time? Oh yeah, well that makes me think, and you add on. It's like improv, but not nearly as like nerdy, you know. So connections is taking one of your core ideas, adding it into something else. This is a little bit ridiculous, but what if we take a lamp and a banana? I don't know what happens. Just exploring that in a thought exercise. This is ludicrous, but you know that's how you start getting these products that are convergent or that shake up what our idea of an MP3 player could be, or a phone, or an audio player. That makes me think of, I described already, but it's connections. It's just forming yes and. Like improv, you're adding on to, you're taking a core germ, and instead of holding on to your own idea or having your own agenda, you try to add on to that. You try to think and say, that makes me think maybe we could do something with it. Maybe it does need to use, or maybe use tracks. Wishing. At this stage in the process, you don't want to be wishing at the end of the process, but in the beginning of the process, wishing is a really great way to be thinking about what's possible. When I say wishing, I mean you're not limiting your thinking. You're saying, man, I just wish this chair could literally be half a pound. I wish I could get the weight down to this insane amount where it just wouldn't be that heavy. You couldn't do it. But in wishing for it to happen, you start thinking of ways to get there, right? Like, I wish I could just get a car to show up when I hit a button on my phone. Wouldn't that be awesome? And you start kind of building that process of how do you do that. Test quickly, throw stuff away, build it, throw it away, build it, throw it away. I mean, that if there's anything we do at Base, it's we build really quickly, really junkily, but it's very quick. It's the process, we throw stuff away constantly. I mean, literally the idea is leaving the sketchbook and it's going into the trash because that has made us think yes and, yes and, yes and. The iteration, the refining, it speaks for itself. But like I said, once you get that core idea of what if we kind of folded this paper so that it could fly. All right, now start testing it. Now start improving it, whittling it down, adding fins, flaps, taking away features, adding features. Then it's time to focus. This image is representing the kid not picked on the team. You know, like you can't do everything. You can't get every single idea, every thought, every little feature set. You have to focus. So you really have to start picking the kids on your team, or the you know who's gonna make the cut and who's not. The biggest way to focus your ideas is knowing the constraints for the project. So what I was just talking about earlier, there are no constraints. You're wishing, you're making banana lamps, you're plugging things together, you're blue sky, right? How do you possibly start focusing those ideas into a refined concept? You have to know the constraints. Design hero of basically everybody. Half of his furniture is probably in here. Charles and Ray Eames, he was one of the first designers, and I just love this quote about constraints. I won't read it because you can read faster than I can speak it. He always spoke of being a designer as knowing the constraints, being focused on the constraints, not ignoring them, not being blue sky, but allowing those to actually sculpt the process. A lot of the times, if you fall back into the constraints and you have a very clear understanding of what those constraints are, they really help to guide the process. The important thing about knowing the constraints is just because you know them doesn't mean the other person on your team knows them. It doesn't mean your manufacturer knows them. It doesn't mean the sales guys know what you're designing to. So when you're working on a team, one of the most important things, and what I'm really guilty of myself, is I will repeat myself like 9 times to everybody that'll listen in terms like, that's a great prototype, it's just, it's got to be lighter. And they're like, I know, you said it's got to be lighter, like 9. I got it. But the more people get those constraints and understand, and they're on the same level, then you're all making forward progress. Somebody's not going, I put wheels on it. You're like, that made it heavier. I wanted it lighter. We got it, So you want to be telling those and sharing the team. You can come up with a list of those constraints. And then what you do is you start sorting and organizing those constraints. So you say, it has to be under 5 pounds. It has to be red. It has to be able to be wheeled across the floor easily. It should pack up in 2 minutes. It should, whatever those constraints are, you start organizing. Then you start prototyping based on proving or disproving those constraints, right? So quick testing models, it either makes it in the bin or it doesn't make it in the bin. Does this idea do X, Y, and Z? What are the most important things it has to do? It doesn't matter if it rolls across the floor easily. If weight is the biggest factor, it needs to be light, and so you need to balance those. You need to weight the constraints. This goes back to, I like this graph because it describes what I was talking about earlier, about that makes me think of, and yes and going broad, making connections and getting inspiration. A lot of times people can't get past this line because they're lost in the sea of possible connections, maybe, I just got to try a little bit more. Maybe there's something I'm missing. Oh, no. What you want to do is know when to cross this line and enter into the rapidly constrained spiral. This is where designers start to panic. Like this graph actually just even gives me a little bit of agita just because it's tightening up and you're like, okay, it's getting real, stuff's starting to matter. There's costs get involved and all kinds of fun stuff. But this is how you want to be thinking about the process. So where are you in this stage and how can you start entering into that spiral? Which one of those tree branches is going to break into something like this? You can do that. So entering into this prototyping stage, the way you can figure out what you want to be prototyping is what does your model want to be, right? Are you trying to get investment from a marketing agency or a venture capitalist? Then it should be a high fidelity model and only part of the idea to prove it, right? We're going to make this new app and it does this and this. Here's how shiny and glossy it looks. Isn't that great? You can be user testing, so you're gathering real data, so it's got to be high fidelity because people are not good at picturing what something is unless you're handing it to them. But then it needs to be fairly complete. That takes a lot of time to build a full wireframe or mock-up of an app or a product. So there's different, you want to think about, are you just proving it to your internal team? Can it literally be 2 pieces of paper duct taped together? Yep, that works, go, like the prototype's done. That's what helps you know what next steps are. If you feel like you're flailing around and like, man, do we need an appearance model? Do we need a full size? Can it be a half scale? Should I 3D print it? This isn't this stage. This is just an insanely detailed mold. Like the most complex thing I've ever seen. It's got all these mold pools and stuff. This is not the area to be thinking about how can it be made or shutting any of that down. You're not that far down the spiral yet, but you want to be in the spiral, don't start shooting ideas down based on materials, processes, the ways that happen. This is a quick aside. I can't recommend this enough. If you're doing anything even remotely where you'd be mocking up, prototyping or anything, this university built what I think is the best snapshot of how to prototype. I'm going to buzz through super quickly, but you can download the PDF if you just look this up. It'll be in the presentation. But it starts with the idea sketch, literally the napkin sketch. You can start talking about certain areas, like doing the study sketch, referential sketch. I'm not going to go through all these, but this is just, how does that thing move? Maybe it's this, maybe it's that. This is what people think of as industrial design, but that's one tiny portion of it, right? This could be way more valuable to your idea, your concept, whatever that is. I'm really going to start buzzing now. Layout renderings are tighter. Perspective drawings or diagrams, like if you're engineering something, like being able to have cross-section. And this little guide is this little card, and it just gives you inspiration, even when you're working with a client or something, of like, what should we actually be showing them for the next presentation so that we're getting buy-in? Like, what do we need to show? Can it be a sketch model that's just blue foam of this new thing? Or do we need to take it to an appearance model, where it's painted? Are we talking about the colors and the materials and the finishes, or are we talking about the overall size and the volume? I can't recommend this enough. And then it gets all the way down to pre-production prototype, which is where everybody wants to be. Drawing. You don't need to be an industrial designer, an artist to draw something, right? You've got mind maps, you've got flow charts, just boxes. If this, then that. Maybe there's one of these down here. I don't know. You just start, hacking at it. Drawing's a really great way to get your ideas onto paper, organize your thoughts, and have a kind of clear graphic of what all the parts are. Physical prototypes, build it. Number one, off the shelf. Whenever somebody grabs a chunk of blue foam and starts hacking away at it, unless you're talking about the surface curvature of how this runs into there, just bolt it together, Like there's something off the shelf that you can hack up. You can cut a piece off, you can glue it onto something. Use off the shelf stuff. It'll save you so much time. To that, if you're designing a wheelchair, buy an existing wheelchair that you think has some attributes and start hacking it up. Start taping stuff onto it. Start, reconfiguring it. Don't be inventing the wheelchair when you actually want to invent the thing that's going to make the wheelchair the next step or better. Right? So buy things, take them apart. Cardboard, pretty self-explanatory. This is very physical, but even the act of designing an ATM machine experience, building a cardboard mock-up that you walk up to speaks volumes that you might just be picturing in menus and in your head. Sculpey, Play-Doh, any of that. You don't need to be an artist and be able to make models with the resolution of this. What you need to do is be able to hack something that you can assign an idea to. That's the biggest thing. It doesn't matter if it's literally a rock, but if you say, okay, this rock is your key to get into your apartment in this business model, right? So you hold this now, picture what that instantly gives you that thing to congeal your idea to. Like I said, you don't need to be developing in this, but when car companies are still developing with all the tools in clay, it just speaks to how powerful that in-hand experience is, the actual, the resolution of that. This is where you start refining. This is starting to get into engaging with a design studio like Base, Daedalus. Like you're testing handle shapes, you're getting resolution models. Designers are taking a lot of these looser pieces and starting to put that all together into foam models. Soft goods prototyping. Just a real quick, this is like a little semi-flag over here. Soft goods are awesome. Don't just assume it needs to be a plastic case for your electronic or a metal table leg or that the screen should be. Soft goods are incredible because what you make in soft goods is the actual thing. And what I mean is, when you're prototyping an electronic device and you 3D print the case and you put the screen in, you're touching buttons, that's great, but it's not the actual molded plastic piece, right? You have to cut tooling, it's this huge investment. Anything else is a substitute. When you're prototyping in soft goods, you can use the actual nylon that you want. You can use the actual rubberized TPU fabric and test that and get the actual form of this thing with no investment in tooling. So as an entrepreneur, if you could do it in soft goods, at least try it because it's way cheaper than tools. Even if you can't sew, you can staple it together, you can glue it, you can get something, but all of a sudden you can start testing ideas and concepts in soft goods. I'll buzz through this really quickly. This is kind of next level in terms of, this is a CAD model. SolidWorks, Pro E, Rhino, any of that. Something like this takes more than 50 hours in a very specialized expertise, right? So a lot of entrepreneurs or startups, especially with hardware, jump into these computer drafting softwares without the knowledge base, without the expertise, and usually they start floundering. They start feeling that the tools are holding them back, and it's limiting what it could be. So CAD models have a very important part, but it's usually better to let that kind of land on somebody else's. We do a lot of photorealistic models. These are for either venture capital or when you're seeking investment or trying to describe your idea, the kind of sizzle reel that we do. You also agree on materials, finishes, logos, that kind of stuff in these real renderings. Again, they take time, they're expensive, but if that's the level of the model that you need, that's what you do. 3D printing is amazing, but it should be fairly late in the process because, once again, getting stuck up in what the process can do or getting it onto the printer might actually be getting in your way in terms of resolving the idea. This is actually a painted appearance model, so once you're down that rabbit hole of 3D printing and testing and you've got your final form, you want to live with whatever that is, whether it is your app, your software, your product, your furniture, your backpack, you want something as close as you can. This isn't a necessary step, and half the time a factory that you're working with, or developers or whatever will build this for you. But without doing this step, you can't have that final part of the process. There's also something interesting called invisible prototypes. These are things that cost no money, you can do super quickly, and half the time they're kind of fun. So acting it out, you don't need anything to walk up and say, okay, if I was walking through a grocery store, and you know, like, boy, turns out stuff should be right about this on eye level so that I want to grab it. You know, like let's elevate this stand, let's bring it up higher into your eye. You get insights just by acting it out, and you might think you can do it in your head, sitting at your desk, but literally, there's so many times when somebody stands up and says, it's so easy, you just do this. And you're like, look at what you're doing right now. Does that look easy? And they're, oh, yeah, I got it. Okay, this would be better. You know, so you start acting it out. This is a really cool one from design school. It's called 7-14-28. A lot of programmers and coders teach this exercise to children with peanut butter sandwiches. So make a peanut butter sandwich in 7 steps. And the kids write out, okay, get the bread, get the knife, peanut butter, put it on. Then you do that, you make a peanut butter sandwich in 14 steps. So you've doubled how many steps. You start getting into the nitty gritty, you know, you take the cap off the peanut butter, use the knife to spread the peanut butter. Then you go to 28 steps, and you're going, I don't know what other possible step, I don't know, mill the grain, like for the bread, I guess? But what that gives you is the tiny little pain points that you might have overlooked in the process, right? They give you like, where are those tripping hazards? Where are the things that are gonna mess a user up that we may not, you know, you might be designing your app in the 7 steps and saying, it's super easy. All you do is put in your email, hit send, and it's off. Well, what if there's 2 steps in here that you're missing somewhere that then messes up every single user that enters the form, or whatever that is? So this is a good way to drill down and kind of test what you might be missing about your process or your model. 7-14. Scale is important. Architects can't build buildings in full scale. They build half-size scale. It's still tremendously valuable, you know, to get an overall sense of things. Working one-to-one, full scale, whatever that is it's another one of those things. When somebody shows me a scale model, unless it's for something as big as a car or bigger, it should just be one-to-one. If you're designing a coffee mug, it should be one-to-one. It shouldn't be half scale. It shouldn't be bigger than normal. Humans interact with it, right? There's not, we don't have space aliens that are 20 feet tall and have a different experience of walking through a door. We all have generally the same experience of sitting in a chair. So work one-to-one whenever you can, whether that's even taping it up, you know, like tremendously effective to get an idea of performance of things or where people are going to move or how they're going to interact with it. You can literally tape it up to a wall. And this can be as simple as an ATM booth, a kitchen, any like warehousing practices. A lot of the times with self-driving cars or automation, that's in human scale. So all of a sudden you can start testing how somebody's going to recharge something by building a full-scale rough prototype. And before they do that clay model, they're doing something like this, taping it up, getting the lines. This helps you kind of aesthetically feel the proportions of it. Human scale. I skipped ahead a little bit, but this is the part of, you know, humans are going to be using this thing. Somebody's going to wear this. So if you're drawing it and it turns out to be 30 pounds around somebody's neck, you really need to know that. And you would have found that out a lot sooner if you just started duct taping stuff to people, you know, to figure that out. Get it into people's hands is kind of the next step. Your baby prototype that's perfect, and you say, look, all you do to open this thing is gently turn this, and then pull this, And look how easy that was. You know who knows how to break stuff? Normal people. So if you hand somebody a prototype, it's guaranteed it's going to get broken. And it'll get broken in some creative way that you didn't foresee, you didn't expect. They're going to hold it upside down and backwards and be like, it doesn't seem to work. And you're like, oh my God, you're killing me. But get it into people's hands, even if it's breaking. Once it breaks, have the hard conversations. Don't say, yeah, they didn't use it right. It's not okay. They're not going to use it right when they buy it off the shelf. They're going to be pissed. It's not okay to be like, yeah, but it's going to be stronger in real life, or it's going to be titanium, not steel. It's still broke. Are we going to... When you're being honest about that, a good place to turn is vendors, the manufacturers, the people that are making this stuff, right? If your chair leg keeps breaking, we don't, at base, try to start diving down into the engineering details. We know that this factory is going to be making this chair. It's real easy to get on the phone and say, hey, how thick do you make the legs typically? What kind of steel is that you do? Hey, what kind of processes can you do? Oh, that gives me an idea, that makes me think of. And before you know it, you've got ideas from the vendors, from the manufacturers who are experts at that. The guy who spends his whole day making spoons knows a lot about spoons. Designers are not experts. People with big ideas are not experts by definition. They're supposed to be what-if ideas, right? This guy is the guy that helps you figure out, like, yeah, but you know that you can't make a spoon with X, Y, and Z. Out of all of these prototyping talk, testing, and how do you develop as like kind of lightning speed, there's two absolutes I consider. There's no set number of prototypes to get to production, to get to a final version, but it's definitely more than one. You're never going to do the one perfect, right? The second part is each prototype is going to teach you something. Most of the time it's going to be something good that you're learning and improving. Sometimes it might be bad, like your company shouldn't exist, or it's not a good idea, or it's too thin, or it's not strong enough. But what that's doing is saving you all of the back-end pain points up front, right? So prototyping early is going to teach you how your design can be better earlier and quicker. This is my little left turn. We've got, I'm doing pretty good. We've got about 20 minutes left or so. This is my super quick guide to making things real and real good. And this is kind of over the course of my education as a designer. I always kind of wished people would tell me these little things, right? Sometimes industrial design in general is viewed as an artistic pursuit, or witchcraft, or black magic, or man, how do you make it look so good, or how does it work so well? Number one, alignment. It's super simple. Just start lining things up. Once you've started gluing stuff together, look at the awful, awful lines on this car. I'm sorry if anybody drives one of these, but look at this line here. You got, a big move happening here, but then a secondary kind of thing. That just goes into this random raised shape. It's too much going on. Like, they've even got cuts down. Like, what is that jog right before there? That's awful. It's awful. This is better. It's just better. They've lined things up. The lids, and it flows into the handle. And it informs me that this should come out. It's very clean, and it tells me, you know what I mean? And all they've done, this would be a much worse thing if the engineers were like, oh, we need to put the coffee basket up here, and it's going to pour in, and then the carafe kind of half in here, and we just put a handle on there. It doesn't inform you. There are aesthetic reasons, making it pretty, making it approachable, making it nice. But that's not the end-all, be-all, right? The fact that this flows into this gives you a sense that you've got a hold of it. There are functional feelings that are so powerful in the buying process that it's not as cut and dry as making it prettier. Along with that, those beauty gaps on the car I showed you, they're a necessary evil, right? So when parts fit up, you need to be planning for parts. Beginning designers, beginning engineers show a metal piece and a wood piece perfectly. Tesla Cybertruck lines, nothing lined up, right? You want to plan for those beauty gaps. You want to know the hood has to open. So it's unrealistic to show this hood as a beautiful hairline gap there that you don't see. That gives you an opportunity typically. This is what's called a beauty gap in a product. This is really old at this point, the actual, the kind of idea behind it. But that gap lets the plastic be slightly out of tolerance. It lets it align better. If that was trying to line up perfectly, it's going to look like a mistake. It's going to be tweaked. It's going to be wavering. It's going to be distracting. If you design this kind of stuff in already, it makes it that much better. This is an example of that. We're working with the client, and they want it to be just this super clean, And the first renders you show something like this for the two plastic parts mating up. Well, this part cools in the mold a lot quicker than this part does, and so those little flanges tend to walk on you. So when you put the thing together, you start getting a little bit of waver all through. So we started looking at it and said, let's put a beauty gap around this, like a sacrificial ridge through here. All of a sudden, as we're exploring that with the client, they're like, you know what, we don't actually even necessarily want people messing with these buttons. Let's just put them inside this code. So then we have these hidden LEDs that you don't really ever use unless you're a technician on the job repairing this one thing, and you just need to see that it's blinking red. And then you've got these little buttons here that you just pin connect, which keeps the user out of there. It's hidden everything, and then from a distance, you've actually made this thing look like it was designed, engineered, like it's spot on, right? So those two parts fit up. So thinking about the connections and planning for those connections instead of going, no, there's not going to be any screws, there's not going to be any washers. Pick one thing to celebrate. This can be in a physical product like this, where most of this speaker is rubberized, black plastic, it's kind of whatever. But this is where everything is. And this is when somebody picks it up, they just end up touching that and thinking about your company and how good that handle feels. Or every time the app makes a noise and it just dings in a certain way, that one thing you celebrate about, the PNC, this is old, but Punch the Pig, they had a campaign in their software because saving money in software doesn't feel like you're saving money. You just see numbers change, you say transfer. But there's a little pig icon, and when you click him, he goes and oinks, and you're like, yeah, that did a thing. That's their one thing to celebrate with that campaign, and people loved it, and they saved more, and they felt better about it, and it's an ownable detail, right? So pick something and really play that up. Combine pieces. So just like something's made out of a bunch of pieces, Volvo did this beautiful trunk / deck lid / rear window, and it makes the entire car. The entire car is based around the idea that they were like, well, we need a trunk lid, and we need glass, and typically you just do something like this where you've got a silver trunk lid and glass. Combining those pieces, look at something and say, you know what, could we consolidate the legs of this chair into the back? Maybe that cleans it up a lot. Maybe that's simpler. Maybe it's easier to manufacture. It has an ownable aesthetic that could be what we're about. So start thinking about combining those puzzle pieces. Along with that, use multiple materials. This is definitely more of a physical thing, but think about all of the touch points. Think about the fact that in this room, the great majority of the surfaces we touch are all fabrics. They're soft goods, right? We all have clothes, the upholstery on the chairs. We're surrounded by different materials that we tend to overlook all the time. So by looking at what something's made of and trying to mix and match materials, you can literally be telling a user, grab here, or don't grab here, based on what materials you end up using. in my personal mission in life, use soft goods, wear them when you can. And then I think the last one is just something kind of creative, just playing with scale, right? So this is 2 competitive strollers. One is kind of engineered. Okay, we got a 1-inch tube. It's 1.5 inches. We got to go to. There's the joint. That's an off-the-shelf bolt. Boom. That's fine. This company just literally played with the scale of that joint to the point where they scaled that joint up and said, okay, instead of doing the bare minimum of what we need, let's blow that out. What does that do aesthetically? What that got for them is they get a free no pinch point. So when these 2 legs come together and it closes, it still is closing completely, but there's a gap in there that's not going to pinch your fingers, right? So it's functional, it's aesthetic. Just play with the scale of things. Think about if the chair is 10% bigger, what does that do to the feel? Does it feel then like a throne, or does it feel like a little desk chair, bar stool you can bring? I guess the basic point is when you're diving into all of these things, always be thinking about scaling up, scaling down, taking this off, putting these 2 pieces together. You play that game throughout this prototyping process, whether it's digital, product design, soft goods, any of that. And if you start melding concepts, that's usually where all of those little design insights tend to shake out, where the magic of design happens. And like Charles Eames said, it's all about the constraints. So you're discovering all of these magical little pieces within the boundaries of this is still a real thing because you've been bringing it along. Does that make sense? So one last time, have an idea. Boy, I wish I could call the car with my phone, articulate that problem. It's a real pain in the butt to get on the phone, somebody hangs up. That doesn't work. Brainstorm the solution, prototype it, build a lot of models, start testing those things. And then you keep repeating this, right? The more times you go through this cycle, the tighter your idea is going to be. I really do think that, 75% of people do a lot of this. Got an idea, it's kind of a thing. This is where companies pivot, by the way. Whenever people say, we're pivoting, this is because they've discovered, it's not even really a problem. People don't want that. This is lighter, this is thin, whatever. Really doing this, people don't do enough of it. Or it's kind of just throwing stuff at a wall. Nobody does nearly enough of this. This is the unsung hero of the design process, the prototyping and testing. It doesn't matter what any of this is, if you're not testing that thoroughly, you can either waste a lot of money, a lot of time, or just have something that ends up being kind of, so. That's it. That's my super quick run through of 1,000 different ideas, all mixed into developing your ideas into something for production. Questions? Thoughts?
Yeah, so I'm interested in the relationship between art and design, because at least academically they're considered very different disciplines. Mm-hmm. So what's the relationship of that maybe at Base Design Studio or in industry?
Yeah, I mean, in today's day and age, it's converging, and we have Nike and Apple and a bunch of others to thank for putting a light on why it's important that it's glossy white plastic. It's not because it's an engineered thing. It's because of the emotional feeling, and then the customer then doing this, and paying. Aside from that commercial value that people assign to the emotional thing of I like this because that gives me a feeling. Other than that, it's a way to be informing users. It's a way to educate. I hate putting labels on products. Unless it's a safety warning, I never want to put pool on a product. It should just make you pool. It should say pool. It should speak to you. And the way you do that is through aesthetics. So through the beautiful thing that draws you across the room, or the handle that you just can't quit touching, the thing that's the beauty aesthetic side, right? I think a lot of the times that's viewed as the veneer that you put over top of it, or just the tablecloth over the table. But when the table is well designed and the legs are perfect proportion and it feels light and airy somehow, and I don't even know how does it feel so nice. It's because of that beauty piece. Yeah.
Yeah. On the website, you categorize your business into strategy, branding, and digital. I'm not sure what the clear cut between those three sections.
Yeah.
And, which section is earning the most revenues for you?
Yeah, that's actually a good point. When we started Base, it was out of my experience with, I learned how to make stuff for big companies, Target, JCPenney, like all of these things, just stuff. So I know how to make stuff. And then I got hired to a startup. It was like, let's put robotics into baby stuff, and how is that different? And it's like high-tech laser beams into like baby swings, right? So it's super pie in the sky. What that entrepreneurial, like that startup culture taught me about was that as much as every marketing firm, every design firm, everybody wants to say that they do the whole process, or they're dialed into every aspect of it, they're not really. So my experience at Four Moms was I was developing the products, the packaging, the in-store POP displays, the website, the graphic, and then as our team built, that became more and more segmented. In that startup culture, you need to have, I call it like all the trains running on time, right? So you can't just have a really great app. You can't have just a sales channel. You can't just have all this stuff. You need to keep it all flowing. So with Base, a lot of the time, when we do a startup, like that laser scanner that I showed you, between Daedalus and us, we developed the actual thing, but Base was also doing their branding. So we did their logo, their website, their brand colors, their marketing. And when that's tied together, that's a pretty strong thing of like, all right, so we're going to use this teal color in only the optics pieces of this thing, right? We're going to call attention to these areas of detail. That's how somebody can look at your company and not just say, well, they make that laser scanner. They know it's a card to laser scanner because they've been kind of trained through this brand. So we do a ton of graphics, signage, point of purchase display. Pittsburgh, as growing as the scene is for tech and for objects, industrial design, product development, it's not, nowhere has enough jobs. I mean, San Francisco doesn't have enough jobs to develop like things. And we should there's a lot of designers that say we should stop developing things, right? Just in general, like we should we've got enough stuff. We don't need more chairs. Like, we're cool. The point is, by getting into signage, POP, websites, brands, all of that, that gives us a wide breadth to still be practicing design and helping companies think critically about it while not designing the next toaster or the next blender. Does that make sense? So we do have projects where we're very clearly designing and engineering the next toothbrush, whatever the heck that is. But just as much and more, it's actually helping a startup explore their early stage ideas about, should you ride this thing, or can you kick it, or should you swing on it, or what, like that kind of forward. So do it.
Yeah, I'm actually curious to hear a little more about your international expansion, because if I'm right, you have another studio in Brussels. No?
That's different Base.
Oh, different
I would love
base.
that.
Okay.
I'd like to go to Brussels. No.
Are you considering moving to different cities within the U.S. and things like that, or is working with clients all throughout the U.S. kind of that range?
So we actually have like 2 international clients right now, one in the Netherlands and one in China. Mm-hmm. That's fine. We've done, like through Four Moms, I've been overseas more times than I want to remember, like for manufacturing and factory visits and getting stuff made. Once you get those partners though, like I'm pretty happy. I have a home studio. I've got 2 or 3 employees that come in and we work together in a nice, comfortable environment. Like, not trying to, build out office buildings or anything like that. I'm a little bit different. I want to work a lot less than I do already. Anything else? Yeah.
How about the beauty gap you had shown? In that you had shown a couple of examples. Can you maybe share some more extreme examples?
Yeah, I mean, so like that all comes from, I first heard about that in design school when they showed like a hood, where the hood of the car is and the A-pillar and the front fender, and where those 3 surfaces come together, like there is no amount of futzing around you could do to make those 3 surfaces meld correctly, right? So they showed us, okay, well in the hood of this, when they stamp it, they actually cut into this edge, and instead of trying to get the metal to go all the way to a really tight corner, they planned for that, and they cut way back on it and put this crease line across here. That ends up being this like natural terminating point, and your eye doesn't even miss the fact that there's no metal in this. I mean, a pretty giant hole in the hood of this car on both corners, but your eye glosses right over it because you're looking at the lines. You're looking at what is there, So like, walk around and look at all the A-pillars of cars, like where the hood intersects with the A-pillar there. Start looking right here in that triangle of front fender, hood, and stuff. You'll see people that do it really well and people that not so hot. And that's all of that nuts and bolts stuff is just. I always wished that there was some really clear cut. There's not a Bible to design or what's good or what's good design, right? But there's a playbook, right? There's a guideline. Like, you don't know what's going to happen when you're on the field, but you can have an understanding of the general guidelines of it. And if you understand things like, hey, we want to make sure these parts like fit up, or we want to plan for that, you're already ahead of the game. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Thanks very much.